The Martinez family had owned their corner lot home in Millbrook Estates for 14 years. Margaret Martinez, 53, had planted every flower that lined the property's perimeter. She'd watched the neighborhood transform from young professional couples to families with children. She'd watched it change in ways that both delighted and slowly, imperceptibly, exhausted her. The pool had been a dream. She and her late husband David had installed it 5 years before his cardiac arrest at 56. That was 3 years ago now. The pool remained, a monument to their plans, their laughter, their future that never arrived. Margaret swam every morning at 6, completing lap after lap in the silence before the world woke up. It was her meditation, her grief ritual, her rebellion against a universe that had taken too much. The neighborhood kids discovered the pool during the summer after David died. It happened gradually. First, it was the Hendersons' teenage daughter, Sophie, asking if she could swim one afternoon when her air conditioning broke. Margaret said yes. She remembered being young, remembered the suffocation of heat in a house without relief. Sophie brought a friend. The friend told another friend. By July, a rotating cast of kids aged 8 to 17 seemed to know the access code to the back gate, a code Margaret had given to the Hendersons in case of emergency. That had been naive. There was no emergency, there was only summer. The kids are just looking for a place to cool off, her sister Linda had said when Margaret mentioned it on a phone call. You have something they don't. Isn't that kind of wonderful? Margaret had wanted to scream. Instead, she'd smiled through the phone line, knowing Linda meant well, knowing that Linda had never been the kind of person who needed peace to survive. Linda had always been a giver, a sharer, a woman who threw parties and made a home the center of the neighborhood. Margaret was different. Margaret was quiet. Margaret was alone. Margaret needed her pool like she needed her morning coffee, not as an extra, but as sustenance. But she was also a woman who had been raised to be nice, to be helpful, to think of others. So she bought new pool chairs and arranged them in a circle. The summer of year 1 had 23 kids who came through that back gate regularly. The summer of year 2 had 35. By the summer of year 3, the summer in which our story truly begins, there were 47 kids with access codes, plus their friends, plus friends of friends, plus kids who simply followed other kids through an open gate because it was hot outside and there was a pool and nobody seemed to be saying no hard enough. Margaret's mornings had been replaced. By 8 a.m., the backyard was a small water park. 12-year-old Brandon from 2 blocks over had declared himself the unofficial lifeguard. 13-year-old Priya had started a splash contest. 8-year-old Marcus had somehow acquired an inflatable unicorn and refused to let it touch the ground. The water went from crystalline blue to cloudy gray within 3 hours. Margaret tried everything quietly first. A printed sign, Pool HOURS 3:5 p.m. only. Kids ignored it. A text to Brandon's mother. The pool is getting quite crowded. I'm worried about safety. Brandon's mother texted back. Brandon loves your pool. He's made so many friends. Thank you for being such a good neighbor. A gentle word to Sophie. The filter is having trouble keeping up. Maybe fewer kids tomorrow. Sophie had looked genuinely sad, and Margaret's heart had cracked like old porcelain. How could she deny this girl, this happy, laughing girl who deserved a good summer? How could she not? But by mid-July, Margaret had stopped swimming. There was no point. The pool belonged to the neighborhood now. She'd check the bathroom trash in the morning and find 50-wadded tissues, mud on the living room floor, wet footprints leading from the back door to the kitchen where someone had made a sandwich without asking and left mayonnaise smeared across her granite countertop. There was also the incident with her fence. One of the older boys, Derek, 17, with a confident swagger and the kind of face that made mothers uncomfortable, had apparently decided that the fence was a good place to practice parkour. He'd climbed it, run across her metal roof, and jumped back down with his friends cheering. Margaret had watched from the kitchen window, frozen mid-sip of tea, as he landed on her rosemary bush and pumped his fist in the air. She'd said nothing. She was a woman who had learned to swallow things whole. It was her friend Janet who finally said it. Janet had come over on a Thursday afternoon in late July, and they'd sat in Margaret's living room, not the backyard, because the backyard was no longer Margaret's, and drank iced tea while the sounds of 23 children echoed through the walls. You have to stop this, Janet said. She was direct in the way that old friends could be, the way that came from years of knowing each other's bones. Margaret, this isn't kindness, this is self-erasure. They're just kids, Margaret had said weakly. They're kids being raised by parents who think your boundary is their child's playground, Janet said. And you're not setting boundaries, you're erasing yourself. There's a difference between sharing and disappearing. Margaret hadn't responded then, but Janet's words had planted something. It took 2 weeks to fully germinate. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in early August. Margaret had woken at 5:30, done her stretches, and put on her swimsuit, the blue one with the white stripes, the one David had always said made her look young. She'd padded out to the pool, still dark in the pre-dawn, and seen something that made her stop. The pool was full, not full of people. The pool had capacity for that, full of trash. Empty soda cans floated like little buoys. A flip-flop drifted near the deep end. Someone had apparently used the pool as a garbage disposal for half-eaten pizza crust and watermelon rinds. Margaret stood at the edge, her hands shaking. She was not going to cry. She would not cry. She had moved past crying years ago, or so she'd thought. But her eyes burned anyway. She spent an hour skimming. Her shoulders ached. Her lower back, which had been troubling her, sent sharp complaints up her spine. By 6:30, the pool was clean again. By 7:30, the kids started arriving. "Hi, Miss M," shouted Brandon, already stripping off his shirt. She watched him dive in. She watched the water cloud around him. And something inside her, something small but resolute, closed like a fist. That afternoon, Margaret made a phone call to her lawyer. His name was Robert Chen, and he'd helped her navigate David's estate. She explained the situation. He listened with the kind of patience that hourly billing made possible. "You can absolutely lock them out," he said. "It's your property. You have no legal obligation to allow access, and you have every right to secure your space. However, and this is important, do not do anything that could cause injury. No spike strips. No sharp objects. No traps. Lock the gate. Post no trespassing signs. Be clear. Be legal. Be done." "What if they've been coming for 3 years?" she asked. "Does that give them some kind of right?" "Not in this state," Robert said. "Not for recreational use. You're good." The chain arrived on Wednesday. 45 pounds of galvanized steel, heavy enough that Margaret had to call a handyman to help her install the heavy-duty padlock. She paid him $200 cash and didn't make eye contact. The no trespassing signs arrived on Thursday. She installed them herself with a cordless drill, mounting them at eye level on the fence every 6 feet. By Friday morning, every parent in the neighborhood knew. The first response came via the neighborhood next-door app, posted by Derek's mother, Kimberly Wallace, at 7:47 a.m. on Friday. "Our community's generosity is being stolen from us. I can't believe some people would rather lock away resources than share them with children who deserve access to summer activities. This is exactly why the world is getting crueler. Shame on you, Margaret Martinez. Your selfishness is visible from my house." The post got 47 comments within the first hour. Margaret watched it unfold while sitting in her locked car in the grocery store parking lot, freezing in the overactive air conditioning, unable to make herself get out and shop. Her phone buzzed every 30 seconds. The neighborhood Facebook group had picked it up. The group text that included 20 parents had erupted into a chain of increasingly aggressive messages. She let them use it for 3 years, and now suddenly she's gatekeeping. "My son has been going through a hard time, and that pool was his happy place. This is so typical of older people, just hoarding things instead of thinking of the community. Actually, we have every right to community resources on a residential street." This was legally incorrect, but Margaret was too shell-shocked to point it out. "I'm calling my city council representative about this. Let's petition for a community pool ordinance." The comments about her specifically began around mid-morning. "Margaret has always been kind of cold. I heard her husband left everything to some charity instead of his family. Makes sense she'd be selfish." This was false. David had named Margaret as the executor and primary beneficiary, and she had donated the remainder to the cardiac unit that failed to save him. Wasn't she the one who called the police on those neighborhood kids selling lemonade? This also didn't happen, but the narrative was more interesting than truth. By noon, Margaret's phone rang. It was Linda. "Have you seen Facebook?" Linda asked, and Margaret could hear the stress vibrating in her sister's voice. "Yes." "It's not good, Margaret. These people are saying horrible things. They're calling you a curmudgeon. Someone said you're having a mental break, and that's why you're locking everyone out. Did you see that?" Margaret had seen it. "I had to do something," Margaret said quietly. The pool was being destroyed. They left trash everywhere. They were climbing on the roof. I couldn't. Why didn't you just talk to someone? Linda's voice had a desperate quality now. Why do you always go to extremes? Why can't you just have a conversation with the parents? I tried. You should have tried harder. Linda paused. Margaret, I'm not blaming you. I'm saying that this is how communities work. This is how we live together. You can't just lock people out. That's not how it works. After Linda hung up, Margaret sat in her car for an hour without turning on the engine. By 3 o'clock, the physical stuff began. She found the first note taped to her front gate. It was printed, not handwritten. Someone had put thought and effort into this. Dear Mrs. Martinez, you have broken the hearts of 47 children who depend on your kindness. How will you answer for that? The neighborhood is watching. It was unsigned. By 6 o'clock, there were 4 more notes, increasingly aggressive. One had a drawing of a crying face. One simply said, cold heart. Margaret took them all down and locked herself inside. She did not answer the doorbell when someone rang it at 7 p.m. She did not answer at 7:30 p.m. At 8 p.m., she looked through the peephole and saw Brandon's father, Michael Hendricks. He was holding a printed petition with approximately 200 signatures. Margaret opened the door. Mrs. Martinez, Michael said, and he had the expression of someone who genuinely believed he was being reasonable. We've gotten together as a community, and we'd like to present this petition asking you to reconsider. The kids need this. You have something that could make such a difference in their lives. The pool needs maintenance, Margaret said. Her voice sounded strange, like it was coming from very far away. It's not a public facility. I'm not responsible for the entire neighborhood's summer activities. No one's saying you're responsible, Michael said. But you have the capacity to help, and you're not. You're choosing not to. That's a choice, Mrs. Martinez, and we're choosing to hold you accountable for that choice. He said it gently, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it with anger. He said it like he was explaining something to a child. My attorney has advised me that I have every right to secure my property, Margaret said. Your attorney, Michael repeated as if the word was an indictment. Of course, that's what lawyers do, isn't it? They teach us how to be legal instead of good. He left the petition on her doorstep. That night, Margaret sat in her living room with all the lights off. She could hear the distant sounds of children playing on the street, their laughter carrying through the darkness. She thought about Janet's words. She thought about Linda's voice. She thought about Michael Hendricks's sad, disapproving face. She thought about her pool, still locked, still glittering under the stars, empty and pristine and entirely hers. And she realized she'd never felt more alone. Her email was worse than Facebook. Parents had found her address in the neighborhood directory. Dozens of messages arrived. You don't deserve to call yourself a member of this community. My daughter cried for an hour when she found out. I hope you're proud. People like you are what's wrong with society. One email came from a different address, and Margaret's stomach dropped when she read it. It was from Kimberly Wallace, Derek's mother. I know for a fact that you're violating some kind of community access ordinance. I'm having my lawyer look into it. I'm also filing a complaint with your homeowners association. You can't just lock out an entire neighborhood. We have rights here. The next morning, Margaret woke to find that someone had spray-painted on her fence. It was sloppily done, pink letters that read, "Mean Lady." She called the police to report it. The officer who came was young, maybe 25, and sympathetic but ineffectual. Kids, probably, he said. Do you want to file a formal report? She didn't. She filled out the paperwork anyway. By Saturday evening, her fence had been decorated 3 more times. The HOA president, a man named Gerald Parsons, whom Margaret had always found suspicious, called her. Margaret, we've received several complaints about this situation, Gerald said carefully. I've reviewed our bylaws, and I don't actually see anything that would prohibit you from securing your pool. However, I would strongly encourage you to reconsider. The community is very upset. I understand, Margaret said. Do you? Gerald's tone shifted. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've created a PR nightmare. These are families, Margaret, children, and you've locked them out. That's the optics of this. The optics, Margaret repeated slowly. Yes, the optics, the way it looks, the way people perceive you now. After she hung up, Margaret did something she rarely did. She opened a bottle of wine at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and sat by the window, watching the empty street. The turning point came on Monday morning. Margaret's neighbor across the street was a woman named Patricia Chen, Janet's daughter-in-law, who worked as a therapist. She'd always been pleasant but distant, the kind of neighbor who waved but didn't linger. Patricia came to Margaret's door around 9 o'clock, holding a coffee and looking uncomfortable. "Can I come in?" Patricia asked. Margaret led her to the kitchen. Patricia sat across from her at the table and took a breath. "I'm not going to tell you what the neighborhood thinks," Patricia said. "You already know, but I'm going to tell you what I think as someone who knows a little bit about psychology and trauma." Margaret waited. "I think you've been kind for 3 years," Patricia continued. "I think you opened your home and your resources even though it was painful. And I think you hit a wall, and that's okay. That's human. What's not okay is the way people are responding to your boundary. Boundaries are healthy. Setting them shouldn't result in character assassination." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I wasn't trying to be cruel," she whispered. "I know," Patricia said, "but here's what I'm worried about. I think you're going to start to doubt yourself. I think you're going to listen to these voices, and I think you're going to convince yourself that you were wrong. And I think that's going to hurt you more than the original decision ever could." "What should I do?" Margaret asked. "Nothing," Patricia said. "You should do nothing. You should let the neighborhood feel what it feels. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Your well-being is." After Patricia left, Margaret sat very still for a long time. That night on the neighborhood Facebook page, Derek's mother posted again. "Some people think they're too good to be part of a community. Some people hoard. Some people take and then lock others out. Well, karma is real. Watch what happens when the neighborhood remembers who was kind and who wasn't." The post got 89 likes. Margaret read it 3 times, trying to understand what it meant, what kind of karma she should be watching for. She realized she didn't care. Or perhaps more accurately, she was beginning to understand that she couldn't afford to care. To care about their judgment was to let their judgment live inside her rent-free forever. She finished her wine and went to bed. By the second week of August, the neighborhood had split into 2 camps. There were the children's rights advocates, who saw Margaret as a selfish older woman gatekeeping summer joy. And there were the property rights advocates, mostly people without children or people who were already tired of the neighborhood's aggressive parenting style, who admired her boundary. The second group was smaller, but louder online. One of them was a man named Stuart, who lived 2 streets over and who apparently had nothing better to do than wage internet wars on behalf of strangers. He posted long, detailed responses to every attack on Margaret, citing property laws and homeowner rights, and explaining concepts like no duty of care to trespassers. He called out inconsistencies in people's logic. He made fun of Kimberly Wallace's use of rights and ordinance, when she clearly didn't understand either concept. It felt good to have someone on her side. It also felt worse, because it meant the conflict had an audience, and now Margaret's small personal decision had become a neighborhood spectacle. On Wednesday of the second week, Margaret received a letter in the mail. Official-looking letterhead from a law firm, Chen and Associates, Family Law and Community Mediation. Inside, a proposal for a neighborhood dispute resolution session with a mediator. The letter was signed by Patricia. "I'm not taking sides," Patricia's handwritten note at the bottom read. "I'm trying to create space for actual dialogue instead of this escalation. Will you consider it?" Margaret considered it. Then Margaret said no. She called Patricia and explained that she didn't want to mediate. She didn't want to discuss. She didn't want to explain herself. "They lied about me," Margaret said, and she was surprised at the heat in her voice. "They made up stories. They spray-painted my fence. They're leaving notes. And now I'm supposed to sit in a room and calmly explain why I'm allowed to secure my own property. No, I'm done explaining myself." "Okay," Patricia said gently. "Okay, I understand. I just wanted to offer it, in case you needed an off-ramp." She did need an off-ramp, but not the kind Patricia was offering. The thing that broke the dam was Brandon's mother. Sharon Hendricks had always been the reasonable one, or at least that's what Margaret had believed. Sharon had been kind to her at community meetings. Sharon had asked about David's passing with genuine warmth. Sharon had thanked her profusely each time Brandon came over. But on Thursday of the second week, Sharon showed up at Margaret's door with red-rimmed eyes and a voice that shook with emotion. Why? Sharon asked. Why won't you let him come? Do you know what Brandon has been through? Margaret invited her inside because she didn't know what else to do. Sharon sat in the kitchen and cried, actually cried, and explained that Brandon's father had left the family 8 months ago, that Brandon had been struggling with depression and social anxiety, that the pool had been the one place where Brandon felt confident and happy. And you took that away, Sharon said. You looked at my son's happiness and you decided that was less important than, what, keeping your pool clean. Margaret had not known about Brandon's father. She had not known about the depression or the social anxiety. Brandon had always seemed cheerful and present. I'm sorry, Margaret said helplessly. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Sharon said. You just locked everyone out. After Sharon left, Margaret sat in the kitchen for hours, replaying every interaction with Brandon through this new lens. His eagerness, his enthusiasm, his desire to be the lifeguard. How much had he needed that role? How much had he needed the feeling of being wanted? For the first time since she'd installed the chain, Margaret questioned herself seriously. Maybe Linda was right. Maybe she should have found another solution. Maybe she should have invited specific families. Maybe she should have set formal hours and hired a monitor. Maybe she should have been more creative in her problem-solving instead of just closing the door. She texted Patricia, I might be ready to talk. Patricia responded immediately, Friday at 2 p.m., my office. The mediation session took place in Patricia's small office on the north side of town, deliberately neutral territory. Attendees included Margaret Patricia as mediator, Sharon Hendricks, representative for the parents, Michael Hendricks, who had shown up in support of his wife, and Derek Wallace, Kimberly's son, 17, who had shown up apparently of his own volition. Margaret's hands were shaking when she sat down. Patricia explained that the goal was for each side to listen to the other. No accusations, no arguing, just listening. Sharon went first. She talked about Brandon, about his struggle, about how the pool had been transformative, about how his therapist had said it was good for him, about how she'd had to put him back on medication because he'd spiraled since Margaret locked him out. She cried. Margaret felt her own eyes filling with tears. Then Michael talked about community, about how his generation had grown up with open doors and open yards, about how this was supposed to be a place where children could feel safe and free, about how Margaret's lockdown had sent a message to the kids, you're not welcome here, you don't belong. Then Derek spoke. He was surprisingly articulate. He explained that, yes, he'd climbed on the roof, and he was sorry about that, but it had been one moment, and he hadn't hurt anything, and he wasn't a bad kid. He was actually pretty stressed about college applications, and the pool had been a place where he could just exist without pressure. Margaret realized as he talked that Derek was not the villain she'd made him in her mind. He was a nervous, lanky boy who wanted to do parkour and worry about college. He was just 17. Then Patricia looked at Margaret. Do you want to respond? Margaret opened her mouth and found that she had no response. Or rather, she had too many responses, too many contradictory truths all trying to speak at once. I'm sorry, she finally said. I hear you. I understand that I've hurt people. That wasn't my intention, but I understand that I did it. So you'll reopen the pool? Sharon asked hopefully. And there it was, the moment of truth. No, Margaret said quietly. Sharon's face fell. Michael's jaw tightened. But Sharon started. Let me finish, Margaret said. I won't reopen the pool to everyone, but I want to work something out. I want to help Brandon specifically. I want to help Derek. I want to find a solution that doesn't require me to sacrifice my own well-being, but that also doesn't require me to hurt the people I care about. So, I'm open to that conversation, but not like this. Not with the neighborhood, not with everyone. Just with specific families who I feel are genuinely trying. Patricia nodded. That's something. That's actually a good place to start. Sharon didn't look satisfied. Michael didn't look satisfied. Derek looked relieved. The thing is, Margaret continued, I need people to understand something. When I say no to something, that has to be okay. I was drowning. I was erasing myself, and that's not sustainable. So if I say the pool is closed on Tuesdays and Thursdays, that has to be respected. If I say I need quiet on weekend mornings, that has to be respected. I can be generous, but I can't be endlessly exploited. Those are the only terms on which I can function. Sharon looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in her face. Okay, Sharon said finally. Okay, Brandon would want to thank you. I think he'd like that. The meeting ended with a tentative agreement. Margaret would open the pool twice a week, Wednesday and Saturday afternoons, 3-6 p.m., to a select group of kids whose families agreed to her rules. No friends of friends, no trespassing outside of scheduled hours, respect for the property, and adherence to a volunteer sign-up system where one parent would be present at all times. It wasn't the victory the neighborhood had hoped for. It also wasn't the complete isolation Margaret had imposed. It was something like a compromise, though Margaret found herself questioning what exactly she was compromising. When she got home, she found a new post on the neighborhood Facebook page from Kimberly Wallace. So Margaret will open her pool, but only to specific families. That's even more discriminatory. How do we as a neighborhood organize against this kind of selective kindness? The post had 12 likes. Margaret muted the thread and didn't check it again. The first Wednesday of the new arrangement arrived with clear skies and 85-degree heat. Margaret had spent the morning cleaning the pool thoroughly, draining and refilling it, testing the pH levels obsessively. She'd set up new rules on a laminated sign: pool open 3-6 p.m. Wednesday and Saturday. PARENTS must attend. No outside GUSDS. Trash in provided BINS. Respect the property or PRIVILEGES end. At precisely 2:55 p.m., Brandon and his mother arrived, along with Derek and Kimberly Wallace. Margaret was surprised to see Kimberly. She'd assumed Kimberly would boycott the reconstituted arrangement out of principle. Instead, Kimberly appeared humble, which didn't suit her, Margaret thought. She seemed like a woman wearing an emotion that didn't fit right. "We're here early so Brandon can set up as the official lifeguard," Sharon explained. "He's very excited about that." Brandon was vibrating with energy. He'd brought a whistle and a clipboard. He'd printed up a schedule for rotating who would be the lifeguard assistant. He treated the role like it was actually important. Derek helped Brandon set up the chairs in a new configuration. The older boy seemed to have found purpose in helping the younger one. Margaret watched them work and felt something in her chest she couldn't quite name. 6 other kids came over that first Wednesday, a couple she didn't know well, a couple she recognized from around the neighborhood. The day was structured and contained and actually pleasant. No trash accumulated in the pool. The kids played within the designated time frame. When Sharon called time at 5:55, the kids actually got out. No protest, no sneaking in a few more minutes. They were grateful for what they'd been given. Margaret sat on a deck chair with her book and actually read. She wasn't monitoring, she wasn't stressing, she was just existing in her own backyard. That night, Kimberly texted her directly. "Thank you for giving Derek another chance. He's been different this week, less angry. I don't know what else to say except I was wrong to push so hard. I think I was scared of being a bad parent. It's easier to blame someone else than to look at your own kid and see how much he's struggling. Anyway, thanks." Margaret didn't know how to respond. She wrote and deleted several versions of a text. Finally, she just sent, "I understand, thank you for this." The second Wednesday went even better. More kids came. There was a sense of privilege to being invited, which paradoxically made the kids more respectful. They'd been told they could lose access if they violated the rules, and they took that seriously. Property damage gone, behavior improved, respect earned through limitation instead of entitled access. By the fourth Wednesday, Margaret found herself looking forward to 3 p.m. By the fourth Saturday, she had to admit that something had shifted, not just for the kids, but for her. She was swimming again, not in the mornings, those remained hers, sacred and alone, but in the late evenings after everyone left. She'd float on her back under the stars and feel something like peace. The neighborhood's reaction was complicated. Some people were pleased by the compromise. Others saw it as Margaret having gotten what she wanted: control, exclusivity, the ability to choose who could be in her space, while also maintaining the facade of generosity. On the neighborhood Facebook page, someone posted a photo of the new laminated rules. The comments came fast. "So she did go back to being selfish. She just made it look like charity. At least kids can swim now, I guess. My kids aren't on her approved list. How do I get them approved? Do we have to kiss her ring or something?" This is classic gatekeeping. She's deciding who deserves to use her pool. That's disturbing. "Actually, it's her pool and this seems reasonable." This was Stuart's comment. "Of course you think it's reasonable, Stuart. You're not a parent of a child on the exclusion list." One mother actually came to Margaret's door and asked why her son hadn't been invited. Margaret explained the system. She'd selected kids based on proximity and based on the family's willingness to participate respectfully. She was keeping the group small specifically so she could maintain the pool's integrity and her own sanity. "So you're discriminating?" the mother said. "I'm curating," Margaret replied. "I have that right, it's my property." The mother left angry. Margaret's sister Linda called on a Saturday evening after the swim session. "This is better," Linda said, and Margaret could hear the relief in her voice. "This is much better. You're helping. You're being generous but also setting boundaries. This is what community is supposed to look like." But it didn't feel like community to Margaret. It felt like theater. She was performing the role of benevolent neighbor, letting select families have access to a resource while excluding others. She was creating an in-group and an out-group. She was doing exactly what the neighborhood had criticized her for, making value judgments about who deserved her kindness. And yet it was working. Brandon was noticeably happier. His mother had mentioned that his therapist was pleased with his progress. Derek had gotten into his first-choice college and credited Margaret's pool-and-whistle situation with keeping him sane during the stress of applications. 4 other kids had formed friendships that seemed genuine and sustaining. Margaret had reclaimed her mornings, she had protected her peace, and she had managed to help some people. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, and maybe, Margaret thought, that was exactly what a good compromise should feel like. The beat came at the end of August, when Margaret was least expecting it. She was walking through the grocery store and ran into Priya, the 13-year-old who had organized the splash contests in the wild days of early summer. Priya was with her mother, looking visibly happier than she had in weeks, excited about school, talking about starting soccer, planning a birthday party. Priya's mother approached Margaret while Priya was looking at snacks. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Priya has been struggling for a while now. We did some family therapy about it. And our therapist pointed out something important. She was getting her worth from being included and being liked. When you locked her out, it was painful, but it also forced us to have real conversations about her own intrinsic value, not just her social position." The woman smiled. "We're grateful in an odd way. It was a hard thing, but it was exactly what we needed." Margaret realized she was crying. By September, school had started and the weekly pool sessions had dwindled down naturally. Brandon and Derek still came, but the others had moved on, to sports teams, to clubs, to the complex social hierarchies of school. The days of unlimited summer were over. Margaret drained the pool for the season and covered it with a tarp. The backyard became hers again fully, a space she'd reclaimed through the complicated alchemy of saying no, listening to pushback, compromising thoughtfully, and ultimately deciding what her own life could bear. But the internet doesn't forget. In October, a piece was published in the neighborhood newsletter. It was written by Kimberly Wallace. "When Kindness Became Selfishness, A Summer Reckoning." The piece told the story of the pool conflict from what Kimberly framed as an impartial perspective, though the bias was clear. She described Margaret's initial generosity as a gift, her lockdown as a betrayal, and her compromise as a calculated performance of care designed to make Margaret look good while maintaining control. "In the end," Kimberly wrote, "Margaret Martinez found a way to be both generous and selective, kind and exclusive, helpful and gatekeeping. She found a way to serve herself while appearing to serve others, and the neighborhood learned that boundaries, when enforced with chains and locks, aren't really about protecting what's ours. They're about deciding who's worth protecting." The piece was shared widely. Within hours, it had been posted on the neighborhood Facebook page, the neighborhood subreddit, and someone had even sent it to a local news station. Margaret read it in bed on a quiet Sunday morning, her coffee growing cold next to her. The thing was, Kimberly wasn't entirely wrong. Margaret had been selfish. She had also been reasonable. She had been generous. She had also been protective of her own well-being. All of these things were true simultaneously. And somewhere in all of this complexity, there was a version of truth that Kimberly had identified. Margaret had found a way to have what she wanted, peace, control, solitude, while still maintaining her self-image as a good person. She'd just done it more efficiently than before. By afternoon, Margaret's phone had begun ringing. News outlets wanted to interview her. Parenting blogs wanted to discuss property rights versus community responsibility. There was even a TikTok post that had somehow found her address and showed a video of the chain and the locks with text overlaid. When she wanted her pool to herself. Margaret didn't respond to any of it. Instead, she called Robert Chen, her lawyer. "I want to donate the pool to the city," she said. "I want to gift the property designated for the pool to the municipal park system. I want it publicly available. I want to just be done with this." There was a long pause on the phone. "Are you sure?" Robert asked. "That's a significant asset you'd lose." "I'm sure," Margaret said. "I can't carry this anymore. I can't be the woman with the pool and the chain and the debate about boundaries and generosity. I just want to let it go." It took 6 weeks to arrange. There were legal documents and tax implications and meetings with the city. The municipal government was thrilled. They got a free in-ground pool, free maintenance, and a PR win about community generosity. Margaret appeared in exactly one press photo, smiling with the mayor, hands on the cold chain that she was symbolically removing. The headline read, "Local woman GIFTS Pool 2 neighborhood says community means more than property." It wasn't true, exactly. She hadn't believed that when she'd made the decision. She'd simply believed that the emotional labor of maintaining boundaries against a hostile neighborhood had become more expensive than simply walking away. But the narrative satisfied people. The neighborhood felt like it had won something. Social media stopped calling her selfish. Parents began thanking her in the grocery store. The pool became the neighborhood's pool, maintained by the city, available to anyone. Brandon went there sometimes, now without needing an invitation. Derek had moved away to college. Kimberly posted a photo of herself in the pool with a caption, "Community resources for everyone, so grateful to live in a neighborhood that shares." No mention of Margaret's name, no acknowledgement of how they'd gotten there. But that was fine. Margaret's morning swims had returned completely to her. She'd reclaimed the 2 hours before the world woke up, 6 to 8 in the morning, for herself alone. She'd filled the empty hours with other things, painting, something she hadn't done since David, reading novels that had nothing to do with self-help or psychology, sitting in silence. She had sacrificed the pool to maintain her sanity. And in doing so, she'd learned something important. Sometimes the most selfish thing you can do is take care of yourself. And sometimes the most generous thing is to recognize when you're no longer capable of being generous. The twist came in November. Margaret received a letter from the City Parks Department. They were implementing a new community swimming program, subsidized for low-income families. Brandon's family had been selected. They received free access passes and free swim lessons for the whole family. So had Priya's family, and Derek's, though he was away at college. The letter came with photos. Brandon as official junior lifeguard at the municipal pool, a real position with a small stipend. Priya taking advanced swimming lessons. A community that finally had actual resources for its children instead of relying on the kindness of one woman's private property. Margaret stared at the photos for a long time. And then she did something she hadn't done in years. She called the city parks director and offered to volunteer, to teach swimming lessons to kids who'd never learned, to be present on the grounds without owning the space, without bearing the weight of others' expectations, without being either entirely selfish or entirely self-sacrificing. She would be something else entirely, present without being responsible, giving without being exploited, bounded and free at the same time. The director accepted immediately. On the first day of her volunteer shift, Margaret arrived at the municipal pool in a new swimsuit, blue with white stripes. She'd finally bought a new one and found Brandon waiting for her by the gate. "Miss M," he shouted, "you're gonna teach me advanced stuff." She smiled at him, this kid who'd started the entire saga, who she'd loved and resented, and finally learned how to hold at the right distance. "Yeah, buddy," she said, "let's see what you can do." As she guided him through the water, teaching him to breathe properly, to trust his body, to move with grace instead of panic, Margaret felt something settle inside her. The neighborhood pool she'd owned was gone. The neighborhood's expectations of her were quieter now. And she had found a third way, neither ownership nor erasure, but something closer to truth. The pool was no longer hers, and that finally was okay.